Welcome to the Modern Medicine Movement Podcast with Dr. Thomas Hemingway. Have you ever looked in the mirror and said to yourself, I thought I'd be healthier, in better shape, feel better both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and be further along in my life? If so, come on this journey with my dad as he explores all things health and wellness from a holistic medical perspective, even as a classically trained physician. He'll share integrative strategies to optimize health and inspire you to join the modern medicine movement.
Welcome everyone to the Modern Medicine Movement Podcast. Dr. Thomas Hemingway here and sending you all a big aloha. Happy November, everybody. Geez, the second week of November already, and just wanted to give you guys, the listeners, each and every one of you, a giant shout out and big Hawaiian mahalo, or thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your feedback. I'm just so humbled and so grateful for each and every one of you taking time out of your busy lives to take a listen and to share. Oh my gosh, thank you. I'm always so humbled by you guys. I'm so grateful. I'm so pumped. I can't wait to share with you the review of the week. This just was just so touching. So appreciate it. This was from Jasmine 314, just came in on Friday. So just a couple of days ago. It says, 5 stars, absolutely loving Dr. Hemingway's enthusiasm and passion for optimizing our health and improving the quality of our lives. He is truly committed to helping all of us understand how making simple habits a priority can have very real health benefits. Dr. Hemingway is extremely intelligent and yet down to earth with a true desire to help the masses. He is so gifted in sharing the fascinating ways that our bodies, minds, spirits are all connected. Thank you. I can't say it enough. Mahalo. Oh my gosh, Jasmine 314, that is so beautiful. Oh, just humbling, just really grateful for that review. So appreciate you. So appreciate each and every one of you. It's just such a pleasure to share these things. Just really a pleasure. So thank you. And keep it coming. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Also hit the write a review button. It's just at the end. If you go to the show, you scroll down like an Apple Podcast, for example, there's the 5 stars. You click on the one farthest to the right, and just below that to the left is that little square with a little kind of pencil thing pointing out towards the right. You just click on that thing, and then you just write a little review. Tell me what you're loving. Tell me, just what your experience has been, and just give me a little pick me up. Sometimes it's rough, I just crank these things out, and it takes a lot of hours of research, and I just am so grateful to hear from you guys. So keep it coming. Really grateful. So appreciate that. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show, the Modern Medicine Movement Podcast, and join my free Facebook group. It's free, and it's called the Modern Medicine Movement Health and Wellness Facebook group. And I'm going to do weekly lives in there. I'll do posts. You'll never, miss the releases of each and every one of my upcoming podcasts. You'll be the first to know. You can also ask me questions. You can, just reply to, the different posts I make. And I usually try to get back to you guys with their questions. You can also do the old school thing. You can email me. I'm a creature of habit. I still do email. So you can shoot me out an email at modernmedicinemovementpodcast@gmail.com. You can look me up on the web, Modern Medicine Movement Podcast, at Facebook, or the Aloha Surf Doc at Instagram, or Modern Medicine Movement at Instagram, as well as my website, modernmedicinemovement.com. So thank you for sharing once again. Super pumped, guys. The podcast topic today, oh my gosh, it's just something millions and millions and millions of us have done, and maybe we've done it a couple of times throughout our lives, and maybe we haven't been so successful doing it. And guess what? It's okay. It's okay. The overwhelming majority of us who try this, do this, repeat doing this, what have you, aren't all that stinking successful, at least for more than a few months. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what's going on with that and how can we be successful? How can we do it? Right? Well, what is the topic? Well, many of us will probably have this on our minds coming up in another month, right? Month and a half when January rolls around, and we might have put on a couple of extra pounds during the holiday season, or maybe, like what I've heard, people say, during this pandemic time of COVID-19, they've put on the proverbial COVID-20 or an extra 20 pounds. So maybe this is ready to roll for us right now. We can talk about it. It's a big subject that literally millions of us attempt every single year, and it's the diet. That's right, the diet, dieting. What the heck? Dieting. Anyway, the research shows at least 45 million people in the U.S. at least are going on diets each year. In fact, some sources say up to 1 in 3 people are on some diet at any given time. Like, holy moly, that's millions and millions of people. All right, let's see it. Show of hands, guys. Have you ever been on a diet? Raise your hand. Come on, up high. Want to see it? Want to feel it? I feel ya. Like probably almost every one of us have gone on a diet at some point in our lives, right? Okay, go back to that time. Did that diet work? Not just for a month or 2 or 3 or maybe 6, but is that diet still working for you? Is it still operational? Are you still able to hold that weight at bay, right? Drop the pounds and keep them off. Like, were you successful? And it's okay. If the answer is no, guess what? You're like the overwhelming majority of all of us. Almost all of us who have been on diets at some point actually gain the weight back. Almost all of us within 1 year, and certainly nearly all of us within 2 years. That's what the studies show. And actually, there was a real cool study just this past April. Right at the outset of the pandemic, this study was reported in the British Medical Journal, April 1st, 2020. So solid journal. And what's interesting is that this was a super robust study. It had, I think, 121 studies it looked at. So this is called a meta-analysis. It's basically a study that groups lots of other high-quality studies together so that you can up the N, right, or the number of people. So they had nearly 22,000 people who had followed one of the 14 major diets, okay? This included things like the Atkins diet, Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, DASH diet, the Mediterranean diet. Okay, lots of popular diets, over 14 of them for an average of 6 months. And so they divided them into a couple of general categories, either the low carb or the low fat or the moderate macronutrient diet. And basically, they measured both loss of weight as well as other cardiovascular measures like blood pressure, cholesterol, while on these diets, okay? So at 6 months, they had a decent success rate. People lost on average up to about 10 pounds on the low carb or the low fat diets. They had about a 10-pound weight loss at 6 months. But the sad thing is with almost everyone, most of that lost weight was regained within, yeah, you're about to hear it, 1 calendar year. 1 year! Like, holy moly! 1 stinking year, and it was already back. Also, the blood pressure cholesterol results, they were good at about the 6-month point where people had lost on average about 10 pounds. But generally, just as the weight came back after a year, these things also went back. The blood pressure that had diminished went back up to the pre-study numbers. Cholesterol didn't hold on very much either. I mean, the only one actually that showed ongoing persistent reductions in cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, while on the diet that persisted was the Mediterranean diet. And that's that's kind of an interesting one. It's actually one that's been studied probably better than almost any other diet. And it's kind of one that, if I ever did go on a diet, I don't really, believe that diets are the best way to do things. And that's kind of what I've always believed, because I've just seen too many people come and go on different diets, and they've replicated what we now have on paper in the British Medical Journal, April 2020, that for the most part, diets don't work for the long term. They just don't work. And you can all think about your own personal experiences and think about why it may not have worked for you, but take a breath. It's okay. It just means you're normal. Like, diets don't really work for anybody long term, really. We can talk about why. There's lots of reasons why this may be the case. There's another similar study that was published in the medical clinics of North America. This was 2 years ago in 2018. And they looked at 29 different weight loss studies. And they showed that overwhelming majority of folks that lost weight, they had regained it within 2 years. And then by 5 years, almost all of them had regained the weight. And so this, study, in addition to the one reported in the BMJ, just basically shows that weight that was lost, almost universally comes back. And we know literally hundreds of millions of people have tried diets through the years, all kinds of different ones. And maybe they've lost weight, but unfortunately, most of this has been temporary, right? In fact, there was a really super interesting study out of UCLA that showed basically that one consistent thing that people who tried, for example, calorie restriction type diets, and this could apply to almost any type of diet, because usually there's some element of counting calories in addition to, selection of certain foods and things. And so almost all diets would basically be applicable here. But the researchers at UCLA basically looked at any dieting group that used any version of calorie restriction. And what they found is that almost none of them were able to keep their weight off. In fact, this was pretty funny. It said the studies indicated that dieting was actually, especially the caloric restriction type of dieting, is actually consistently a predictor of not only gaining that weight back, but a future weight gain. Like, holy moly, a predictor of weight gain is going on a diet. Like, has anybody ever experienced that? Who, there's no shame here. There's no judgment. Who's been on a diet, lost some weight, and then maybe a year or 2 years later, you are already back up to your starting weight and maybe even a couple of pounds over that? Who's done that? Like I said, if you're like most people, almost everyone who's dieted has done that before. Like, that's crazy, right? That's just crazy. I mean, this is not something that, you would sort of predict de novo, that anybody who goes on a diet will ultimately gain weight, and not only gain weight, but maybe even gain a little bit extra weight. Like, this is crazy. And so if this person happened to be you, you're normal. It's okay. You're normal. Don't be ashamed. You're normal. These studies are showing that. And so what I'm going to talk about today is something other than a traditional diet, how we can actually make real changes that will withstand the test of time, right? We're going to talk about that. And it's not going to be specific to any one type, of diet, the DASH diet, the Atkins diet, the paleo diet, the Mediterranean diet. We're not going to, stick to any specific dietary plan, because you know what? Everybody can have potentially different results. You got to go with what suits you best, right? People ask me, they go, hey, what's the best exercise for me? And no joke, what I tell them, it's the exercise that you will do, right? If you absolutely hate whatever exercise you start up and doing, you might be able to do it for 1 week, maybe 2. And if you're like super highly motivated, maybe a whole month, right? Who's bought a pass to the gym and they started to take a certain class or they started to do a certain activity, but they really, really hated it. They felt like, oh gosh, I should just get on that treadmill because I know it's good for me, but I absolutely hate running. Like, who can do that for more than a month or two, right? It's hard. The best exercise you'll do, or for you, I should say, right? The best for you is the one that you'll do, which is the same thing with respect to dieting, because if you choose a diet and you absolutely hate the food, like, how long are you going to do that? Probably not that long. So we're not going to be talking about any specific diet per se, but we're going to be talking about some principles of how we can make solid health and lifestyle changes that will be good for the duration for our lives, that will help us throughout our lives. And before I get into that, we'll talk about maybe a little bit of why dieting doesn't really work, And how many reasons are there? Well, I could go back to the old TNTC, right? Or TNT from our old science courses of high school. Too numerous to count. Like, that's how many reasons there are for why diets don't work. My favorite is the fact that the word diet has within it the root word die, right? D-I-E, die. I mean, nobody wants to die. So why would you go on a diet, right? I mean, look at that nomenclature. It's kind of funny, right? It's just unnatural to force yourself to be on some weird restrictive diet, eating things that you don't even like. I mean, how many people that have never had like kale before are all of a sudden going to eat like 3 salads a day comprised of primarily kale? Like, who's going to do that, right? I mean, if you hate the food, I mean, the likelihood of you staying on that long term is just super slim, right? We talked about it. So, what we've talked about is most programs, these different diets, quote unquote, just don't work for the long term. I mean, up to 95% of people, studies show, who lost weight will regain it. Some in 1 year, some in 2, and almost all of them by 5 years. Like, that is what happens. So really this dieting kind of thing is really by definition a temporary food plan, and it just doesn't work in the long run. And that's not what we want, because who wants to deprive ourselves of certain things or be super restrictive to where it's just not even fun? Like who wants that, right? What I'll show you is that you can lead a healthy life, which will include a healthy diet, which will not even feel like dieting because it'll have real food, like tasty, tasty food. Like, last week I podcasted on, some of the most famous centenarians in the world, and they come from places, guess what, that have phenomenal food, right? Who has been to Italy? Oh my gosh, I've been there twice in my life, and I would go there again in a heartbeat, like just to eat the food. The food is phenomenal. It tastes so good. And yet these are the people eating this diet that go on to live 80, 90, and 100 years. And they don't, quote unquote, diet at all. They just eat real, whole, healthy, non-processed food. Like, it's pretty dang simple, right? So another reason diets don't work is because many of these are just like fads, and they come and go, and a lot of them actually lack a lot of essential nutrients. Like, I think kale is awesome, but if you eat 3 meals of kale a day, like, you're going to be missing out on a few things, right? I mean, kale doesn't have everything in the world that you need. I mean, it's got some good stuff. It even has some iron in there. If you listen to my iron and anemia podcast, it does have some iron. Not as much as a good old-fashioned tri-tip steak, but there is some in there. And I love kale, actually. I just don't eat it 3 meals a day. But this whole issue of different dietary patterns, many of them are fad types. They're just unnatural. And a lot of them actually don't have all the nutrients that you need. And so often you'll have this, quick drop in pounds, and then you'll go back up, this whole sort of yo-yo phenomenon, right? And what I alluded to before is not only this, but many of these fad diets are super restrictive of certain things. And so it kind of takes the fun out of eating, I mean, you don't want to be the proverbial, sacrificial lamb, if you will, and just deprive yourself of of eating anything that's good, that tastes good. Like, that's no way to live, right? That's no way to live. Also, just this compulsory, diet that just you do and you force yourself and you just do dieting over and over again. Like, that's just not even fun. And a lot of times this can even lead to future eating disorders because it connotes, or it basically will make you oftentimes have, an unhealthy, unnatural relationship with food. And that's not good. Like, food is not the enemy. Like, ask anybody who knows me. I love to eat. I love it. I love tasty food. And I'm so grateful. I've never been overweight in my life, but I try to avoid certain types of food. A lot of the highly processed stuff I just stay away from, except maybe a special occasion. I'll have something, but I don't do that kind of thing very regularly. And it's worked out. It's panned out. And so we don't want to develop unhealthy relationships with food, right? It's just in the end going to come back to bite us. I mean, there's even some ties with our early childhood experiences that will unfortunately start a bad sort of downward spiral that will lead us into our adult life because of the relationship with food that we might have had. It could have just been, the way that we were fed. It could have been emotional trauma. It could be physical trauma. A lot of the different traumatic experiences that kids can experience can lead later to unhealthy lifestyle choices, including unhealthy diets and overeating and eating disorders. And so we don't want to propagate this. We don't want to spread this notion. We want to have a healthy relationship with food because food is a part of life. And I would just purport that it's one of the most enjoyable things we can do. And we could learn a lesson or two from our friends in Sardinia or the Isles off of Greece who have amazing diets, and yet they live to be 100 years old, many of them. So we don't have to be self-deprecating. We don't have to deprive ourselves of the good things of life by being on a starvation diet or a deprivation diet. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. So we can do this. I just want to let you know that it is possible. It is possible to enjoy food and to have a healthy weight. Like, those two things are not mutually exclusive. They're just not. They're just not. And some other things to think about is just the notion of weighing less than, say, a certain other person. That doesn't mean that the person who is thin is more healthy. Like, that doesn't always work out that way. I've seen a lot of thin people, in my work as a physician, that are really not healthy at all. In fact, many, many, many very uncontrolled diabetics that I've seen are super thin. So just a certain weight in and of itself doesn't connote health, right? So this unhealthy relationship, not only with food, but with the scale, may not be ideal, right? We can be healthy and not be rail thin. Like, it's possible. It's possible. Remember Dr. Bickman's podcast. We have sort of the healthy way to add fat, and the unhealthy way, right? This whole notion of the different type of fat, depositing ways. You have the cell that gets really big, the hypertrophic fat cell versus the hyperplasia or more fat cells. And when you got these big, giant fat cells that don't work properly, that's the unhealthy kind of fat. That's the type that leads to insulin resistance. You can learn all about that in Dr. Bickman's book, Why We Get Sick. So I'm not going to perseverate here, but it's not just a number on a scale, right? It's function and metabolic health and not having insulin resistance. And that doesn't mean you have to be rail thin, right? It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. So we need to reestablish what true health is. True health is not only what I learned way back when in medical school, the absence of disease, but it's our bodies working in the manner that they were designed, having a healthy metabolism. And this doesn't mean that you have to be rail thin. It absolutely does not mean that. You can be metabolically healthy and be a full person as well. Okay, but we need to focus on how we can get healthy from the ground up and have our metabolisms work efficiently. So we're going to talk about this and talk about, how we can overcome these, sort of cyclical diet gain weight, the yo-yo effect that I talked about a little bit, because it's ideal, right, to not be going up and down and up and down. You would like to have more of a consistent, healthy weight. You want to be consistently healthy all the time and not just fit into your jeans once for like a reunion or something, and then a few months later, go back to how you were. That's not what we want, right? We want to be healthy and be functional and be able to keep that ideal body weight, whatever it is for us, and ideal metabolic health, so we can have the energy that we so desire. And let me tell you guys, it's not just about food. It has a lot to do with food, but it doesn't mean any strict dietary plan of all those that you've heard of, those 20 common ones that the study looked at, the keto, the paleo, the DASH, the Jenny Craig plan, the Weight Watchers plan. None of these, you don't have to follow any of those things. You just have to go to my simple method, right? The very simple, I keep it super simple. I just call it the whole, real, natural food method. That's it. Natural, whole, real foods. You can do it simply. It doesn't have to be complicated. But beyond food choices, there are a couple other factors we should be thinking about. We should be thinking about getting adequate sleep. Because you may or may not know this, but if you don't get adequate sleep, and most studies will say, 7 hour sort of minimum, 7-8 hours is great. Some people require 9 hours, but if we can get at least 7 hours of sleep a night, then our metabolisms will function much better. And this has been shown in the data. It's very interesting. A study came out a few years back that looked at people essentially on the same exact diet, same amount of calories, same stuff that they were eating. And it was a real controlled study where they looked at weight loss, and basically those people that did not sleep the requisite minimum of 7 hours per night, not only were they not able to lose the same amount of weight that those that slept 7 or 8 hours a night, but when they lost weight, they didn't preferentially lose, the fat that most people wanted to lose, but yet they were losing a higher percentage of muscle mass than the people who slept the full 7-8 hour nights. And this is not a commonly known thing. I mean, the importance of regular, consistent, healthy sleep, 7 hours per night minimum is what I would propose would be a good number to shoot for. It's not just good, for your mind, your body, your soul, to refresh, but it's also good for your metabolism so that you can maintain the proper weight. And I see this a lot. I work night shifts at the hospital, pretty common. And I've seen that on average, a lot of the folks that work the night shift struggle more with weight because they really have a challenge in getting the right amount of sleep. It's just super difficult for them to get adequate sleep when they're up all night, just flip-flopping back and forth. It can be super challenging. And so I would propose to you that sleep is super important also for maintaining a healthy weight. And this is not often talked about, but it is a pillar and it is super, super important. Another thing that's super important that we need to focus on, and this will help us throughout our lives to maintain a healthy weight, in addition to 7 hours minimum of sleep a night, healthy, restful sleep, is having an adequate water intake, right? I talked a whole podcast about water and salt balance, and I would say a minimum of 70, 80 ounces of water per day. Minimum. Did you know that water actually has a thermogenic effect? I was looking at a couple of studies about this just to, be able to share with you the details. And one of them looked at a couple groups of people that wanted to lose weight. And the one group, they gave them, I think it was like 7 ounces of water prior to every meal. So it was like an additional, 21 or so ounces of water. And their metabolism worked so much better. And they were able to, I think it was at least a 30% improvement with their metabolic rate and weight loss efficiency. And this was just a simple thing they did. They drank 7 ounces of water with every meal. And I would purport that not only does, as these 2 studies, and I'll put them in the show notes, reveal that water has kind of a thermogenic effect, but I've mentioned this before. If you drink a full glass of water, at least 8 ounces, maybe even 10 or 12 ounces. This is what I do every time I go out to eat. I drink a bunch of water before my meal, and then I don't really want to eat a giant meal. It has a satiating effect because the stomach receptors are, excited because they stretch and they tell the brain, hey, you're already kind of filling up. You don't need to eat so much. But in addition to that, there's also a thermogenic effect of water. Like, water is awesome, super healthy. So we need to drink our water, at least 80 ounces of water per day. At least, I would say, my typical rule on average, depends on where you live. I mean, I live in Hawaii, so I'm sweating like crazy. I drink at least 1 ounce for every pound of weight I am. So I'm about 150 pounds. I drink about 150 ounces of water per day because I'm sweating like crazy. But I would say at least try to drink 80 ounces of water per day, like average adult, okay? So I talked about sleep a little bit. I talked about water intake. Regular exercise is a third super important pillar in maintaining a healthy weight throughout your life. And I would recommend on average, approximately 120 to 150 minutes per week. So you can break it down, 6 for 6. My wife likes to use that sort of tagline, 20 to 30 minutes a day, 6 days a week. I would say if you did that 25 minutes, 6 days a week, you're right there. You're at 150 minutes. Or if you want to do 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, you're at 150 minutes. And this can be something so simple as walking. Like if you go for a short walk after every meal or after 2 out of the 3 meals, 15 minutes after lunch, 15 minutes after dinner, you've got it. You've got your 30 minutes, and that will not only aid with your digestion, but it'll aid with your metabolic rate. And this is something I also saw visiting Italy, is they almost always would walk after their meals. I mean, they love to walk over there. Hardly anybody drives a car. I mean, they walk everywhere. They're so healthy and they eat so well. They'll legit eat like a 3-hour dinner. I mean, they just eat and eat and eat and eat. And I almost never saw any local people born and raised in Italia that were obese. I mean, I just didn't see it. And these are the same people that can live, 1 or 2 decades longer than the average American because they not only eat a great diet, but they move. They move, right? Regular exercise. So those 3 pillars are so important. And, I also wanted to touch on just a little bit of the historic background for this whole thing that we obsess about in our culture. And all the diets have some basis in the calorie, right? Like, what the heck? Why do we put so much stinking emphasis on the calorie? Like, why do we do it? It's interesting because it's sort of like this love-hate thing. I mean, for over 100 years, we've been obsessing about the calorie. It's put on this pedestal, like this is the holy grail of dieting. You got to have X number of calories. Every food label we look at has the stinking calories on there. Like, what the heck? Like, where does this come from? Why do we even use the calorie? Because originally the calorie was nothing to do with nutritional science. Absolutely nothing. And this I learned actually in my physics and chemistry class. The calorie was designed as basically a unit of energy. It's a unit of heat, really. And the original definition is basically the amount of heat needed to raise a gram of water 1 degree Celsius. That was described way back in 1800s, early 1800s, 1819, I think Nicholas Clement was given that sort of, he did this definition, or he was one of the first to kind of describe what a calorie was. And then the German physician in 1848 Julius Mayer kind of talked a little bit more about it, and then even the guy Atwater, and later I think one of the physicians many of us may have heard from turn of the century wrote a book called Diet and Health with the Key to the Calorie in 1918. This was none other than the famous Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters, and she may have been the original diet book, that literally sold a couple million copies. I mean, she was like the original diet book, and it was back in 1918, I believe, which is just crazy because she not only talked about the calorie and counting calories and relating, calories in food and blah, 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 but unfortunately, I think she started this bad relationship. Probably not started, but really potentiated this sort of unhealthy relationship with food, and that if you were, unable to control your desires and you were unhealthy weight or whatever it was, that you all of a sudden this became a moral problem. And, is this huge issue way back when in the early 1900s. And unfortunately, it still persists today, this obsession on this silly thing called the calorie, right? This obsession. And it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, the calorie, if we think about it, is a unit of measure. It was never designed to have anything to do with nutritional science. Like, it literally meant the amount of energy, once again, needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water, 1 degree Celsius. This is little c calorie, okay? And nowadays in our nutritional labels, we actually don't use this little c calorie. We use a big C calorie, which is 1,000 times greater than the little c. It's literally a kilocalorie, right? And that's a kilogram, the amount of energy to raise 1 kilogram of water, 1 degree Celsius. And that's what we use in nutritional science for whatever reason. Probably because we don't want to look at that label and have it say, oh my gosh, you've just consumed 300,000 calories or whatever it is. It's funny. I bought some mac and cheese just to confirm to myself that they no longer use those artificial dyes, the yellow 5, the yellow 6 that they used to, because several years ago in foreign countries outside of the U.S. and Europe and other countries, they actually quit using those artificial dyes, but they were still using them in the U.S. And so I wanted to make sure that they no longer use them, because I'll be honest, occasionally my kids eat mac and cheese, and I'm grateful that they finally took out those artificial colorings and they just use things like paprika and a couple other things that are natural for the coloring, right? It's no longer colored with artificial food colorings, the yellow 5, yellow 6, thank goodness. But I was looking at a label and it said that one serving was like 360 calories, if I'm not mistaken. I just had looked at it yesterday. And so that's actually the kilocalorie. So legit in the traditional system, that would be that one serving of mac and cheese would be 360,000 calories, the little c calories, the amount of heat required to raise 1 gram of water, 1 degree Celsius. That legit would be 360,000 calories. So that's why in the U.S. we use this unit called the kilocalorie, which is the capital C or the big C on the food labels, because we would be freaking out, right? If we knew that, say, a bowl of ice cream was 600,000 calories. I mean, we'd be totally freaking out. In other countries, they often will use joules, because that's kind of the international unit for energy, is the joule. That's the metric system unit. That's what I studied and learned in chemistry and physics, for example. And if you're scientific buff and you like these nerdy, numbers and things, if you want to know it, 1 calorie, now that's the small calorie, the small c, is defined as exactly 4.184 joules. Or the kilocalorie is 4,184 joules, right? So that's a lot, man. And a lot of other countries actually will use, these labels with the joules or kilojoules. And how this all came to be was way back when to even develop a label and put how many calories, they used this old technique. It was called the bomb calorimeter. And it's super interesting. Basically, they would combust or burn the food. They would literally burn it in one glass flask that was placed within a second glass chamber which had water in it, and the heat that was given off by the combustion, like the legit burning of the food, would raise that water a certain number of degrees Celsius, and then they would be able to say how many calories that food source had within it. Like they literally burned the food, and the heat that was given off, that's how they determined how many calories was in the food. Like, number one, like, how does this even make sense? Like, in our bodies, are we like lighting a flame or a chemical, torch, if you will? Are we literally putting our food and torching it and watching it ignite and burn? And then does that give us energy in our body? Like, no way. Like, how is this even physiologic? Well, this was how originally they decided how much, or how many, I should say, calories were in a certain type of food. Like, this legit was how they determined this, by burning or combusting food in these bomb calorimeters. And this isn't really used today, but the process of this gave us some kind of, general rule values, if you will. Many of us have heard these, right? Like, for example, we say that, a carbohydrate has approximately, 4 kilocalories per gram, right? Or 4 calories, the big C calories per gram, as well as a protein will burn 4 calories or big C calories per gram, as opposed to fat would be 9 kilocalories or the big C calories per gram. And so we kind of use these arbitrary numbers now to calculate the calories in food, but it was all originally based upon this bomb calorimeter method, which legit burned or combusted the food. So not only do we have this like obsession with the calorie and this kind of love-hate relationship, the calorie counting, if you will, in all the major diets, but how accurate is this really? Like, the fact that we use this combustion to actually determine it in the beginning, like the basic roots of it, like this doesn't even really make a lot of sense. So the underlying notion that a certain amount of carbs or fat or protein contains this many calories is probably not that exact. And there's so many other factors too that go into this that I don't even have time to mention. But, let's just say you take a sweet potato, for example, or another fruit or vegetable that has carbohydrates, but many of these can be in the form of undigestible fiber, which is a carbohydrate, but we in our bodies just can't digest it. So now they're kind of taking that into consideration more into the food labels, and they're trying to be able to make them more accurate. But I'll just be honest with you. I've never counted calories, and I don't miss it at all because it's confusing. It's not super accurate. And this whole notion that I learned when I was in school, the calorie in equals calorie out, like it just doesn't add up. It's not that simple. Another fascinating study, which I'll try to include in the show notes. I had it pulled up and then I flip-flopped over, but basically the gist of it was they took, two groups of people, one that ate the so-called, healthy diet, and the other that ate the processed diet. They basically fed them the same amount of calories, but the one group, the calories came from processed foods. For example, part of the thing was like cheese, right? One of them had like Velveeta processed cheese. The other one had, a more natural, wholesome, pure cheese, if you will, that was not processed in any way. And they compared the two, and although they had the same amount of calories in the meal, the one person had the super highly processed meal. I think it was some type of a sandwich, and they had, the processed bread, the processed cheese food, whatever. The other person had the, healthiest bread possible, the starter derived sourdough bread with only natural ingredients, and it had a pure piece of cheese on there that didn't have any processed things in it or chemicals, and they had the same amount of calories. And guess what? They didn't it didn't work the same. The people who had the pure, or the more healthy, I should just say, the more healthy food that wasn't processed, didn't gain as much weight. Their metabolism worked much better. I mean, it actually matters, I guess, at the end of the day. The point I'm making is that it's not just the numeric calorie number. It's what makes that up. What is the food that we're talking about? Is it a highly processed food, or is it a whole natural, real food that's not processed? It actually makes a big difference. You can't just count the calories. And so I don't count calories really ever, to be honest. I read labels mostly to see what's in there, so I'm aware of what's in my food, but I almost never look at the calories there, because it's not so simple. It's not so simple. And, in our bodies, there's so much else going on. It takes energy to digest our food, everywhere from our chewing to the stomach acid to, our intestines working to break things down as well, reabsorb them. I mean, there's so much that goes into it that you just can't simply rely upon a label and what the number of calories are. It's just not that simple in the body, and it's based on, some pretty questionable science with this whole notion of the bomb calorimeter that I talked about. So don't obsess. My point is, don't obsess about the numbers of calories in any given type of food. Instead, pay more attention to the makeup of that food. What's in it? Do you recognize the ingredients, right? You've heard me say this many times before. I go back to kind of this arbitrary rule, the 5 ingredient rule, I just like to call it. The 5 ingredient rule. If there's something I'm purchasing has more than 5 ingredients, I better look long and hard and make sure I really want to eat that. Do I recognize all those ingredients? Are they things that I want to put in my body? Are there a bunch of chemicals in there? Are there a bunch of seed oils in there? Like, what's in there? I want to know. Where does it come from? What's the source? Is it organic? Is it pasture raised? Is it grass-fed and finished? If we're talking about meat, for example, like all these things, in my humble opinion, matter more than the amount of calories that's in there. And that's my humble opinion, but I've seen it to work, and I've seen it to work in many people. I've gotten many, many thank yous over the years where I've basically shared and encouraged people to eat real, wholesome, healthy, whole food. Like, stop the processed crap. Like, just stop it. Stop the processed crap. Eat real food, and you'll be so much better off. Not only will you not really have to watch the calories, but your metabolism will work better, more efficiently, and much cleaner. Like I mentioned in that example of the process versus the whole food. Like, it actually works that way. It works out that way. And we don't want to, do our bodies a disservice by just being a calorie in, calorie out person and not even caring what those calories are made up of, because our bodies are made to work more efficiently, better, give us more energy with real, whole, natural food, especially those that comes from natural plants and animals that our body recognizes. And I'm not going to purport that we all choose a certain diet, vegan, vegetarian, carnivore, paleo, whatever it is. I'm going to say choose whatever works for you, but choose real, whole, natural, hopefully organic, healthy foods, like just real stuff, okay? All right, enough about that. Sorry to perseverate, but at the end of the day, it really matters. The type of food matters so much more than the number of calories on that silly label. Like, I hate those stinking labels. They're so annoying because I think they give people complexes. Like, they've created lots of eating disorders, really, where people are just obsessed about the silly label. Like, don't obsess about it. Do you think the folks in Sardinia, Italy, obsess about what's on a label? Heck, they probably don't even eat anything that has a label on it. They're eating wholesome, actual, real, natural foods, both plant and animal, right? They eat cheeses and milk and meats and fish and fruits and vegetables. They even eat bread. Like, remember last time I shared, the Sardinians eat bread literally every lunch, every day, but it's real, bread that they make. It's not from a package. Like they use a starter that's maybe been in their family for a couple 100 years. Like how cool is that? And they just make it with natural ingredients. It's not bad. Bread is not the enemy, but most breads out there that are highly processed are. So it's what's making up the stuff you put in your mouth. It's not just, is it a carb? Is it a fat? Is it a protein? It's like, where is that coming from? Is it a real source? Is it a natural source? Because if so, your body's going to recognize it. It's going to utilize it much better. You're going to work more efficiently. It's really so simple, and it does not have to be difficult. And one other thing just to round us out as I close is not only does it matter the foods that we put into our bodies, but it's the overall health of our microbiome. And I did 2 podcasts on the microbiome really early on, because not only is that important to things like our mood and our immune function, our microbiome actually is super important in our digestive processes. Like it actually, these trillions of bacteria largely within our gut contribute so much to the way that we absorb foods. And the healthier our microbiome is, the more diverse it is, the better we'll metabolize our foods. And this has been shown. Like I mentioned this in my podcast earlier. If you took a overweight person and a thin person, and you compared their gut flora, they'd be totally different. And so paying attention to our microbiome is super important as well. And I'll just kind of refer you back to those couple of podcasts that I did early on about the microbiome, because I talk all about how to be able to not only have a healthy group of, good bacteria, but to have a diverse group of bacteria. And it's by eating both plant and animal foods especially can help with this. But primarily, it's natural foods. It's just real foods, plant and animal, can help with the biodiversity of our microbiome, which at the end of the day will help us metabolize our food better and efficiently, and to not get fat. I mean, it's just like amazing how much we can benefit from a healthy microbiome. So please go back to those couple of podcasts and take a look at those concepts of the healthy microbiome, because really at the end of the day, it's not difficult. It's not challenging. We can all do this. It's something that is possible, and it is possible to maintain a healthy weight for life. You don't have to be condemned to a perpetual yo-yo dieting program where you lose weight, you gain weight, you lose weight, you gain weight. That doesn't have to be you. Like, rewrite your story. You can do this. You can do this. And it's very simple. It's not challenging. It's not difficult, but it does involve paying attention to what we put into our body. And primarily, it's healthy, whole, natural, real food. I can't belabor that enough, right, guys? Let's just do this. I just want you guys to know that it is possible to maintain lifelong health, not through yo-yo dieting, not through a certain type of diet, whatever that may be. It's what works for you, the food that you like, that is real, that is wholesome, that is natural, not the food that you like that's processed, because we do have to limit ourselves with those processed food. I'll be honest, like, that's something you're going to have to limit. You're going to have to limit that. You're going to have to limit your snacking. I've talked about that before. Try to narrow your window. Do something akin to intermittent fasting, where you have a rest period where your body is not being fed things that are going to raise its insulin levels, because it matters. It matters, but it's very simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. Go back to my intermittent fasting talk. It's simple. So real, wholesome, natural foods. Make sure you're drinking enough water. Make sure you're getting enough sleep. Like, you guys can do this. And then you got to get out and move, like the 6 for 6 that my wife talks about. You got to get out there 6 days out of the week. You got to move your body, and it'll happen for you. And you will be able to have lifelong health, a healthy weight, not just for a month or 2 or 3 or 6 or maybe a year if you're lucky, but for life. You can do this. It is possible. It is possible. It can be done, and you can do it. Aloha and mahalo. Until next time.